Right now, Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, Speaker Lee Chatfield, and other members of the Republican delegation are in Washington, D.C. to meet with Donald Trump in an attempt to stop the certification of Michigan's election and effectively overturn our election here in Michigan. It is dangerous and reckless and embarrassing for our state. We've received hundreds of calls about the election in our office, and I wanted to put together my thoughts to reach as many people as possible. First, we were bombarded with people who wanted us to stop the election, stop counting, with broad claims of fraud that have proven to be unfounded time and time and time again. So I want to address our elections first and then talk about what we should be focusing on, which is the fact that COVID-19 is ravaging our state and ravaging our entire country. And we have a crisis here at home that we need to be focused on, not a made up crisis to assuage the ego of one man currently in the White House. This election was the act of heroism from clerks and election workers and poll workers and volunteers who put in months, if not years worth of work preparing for this election in the middle of a pandemic. And I have very good relationships with the clerks throughout our district, and one of my closest partners in this is a Republican who happens to be a nationally renowned election security expert. And at the end of the day, these are public servants. These are people who fundamentally believe in everybody's right to a fair and secure election, who go out of their way to make sure people have the information and access to the ballot. And that happened. So I want to talk a little bit about that process first, and the many steps and checks and balances that we have along the way to make sure that our elections are fair and secure when we run them here in Michigan. First of all, in Michigan, we utilize 100% paper ballots. On absentee ballots, you have to sign your name on an application in order to receive a ballot, and then you have to sign again when you turn in your ballot, and these signatures are checked against the signature on file to make sure that you are the one who is able to vote when you apply for an absentee ballot. Having paper ballots is critical to ensure that there's no digital hacking, there's no fraud in the systems and the computers that run themselves. We have a hard copy record of every single vote that is cast in the state of Michigan. And it gives us a hard copy backup for risk limiting audits. And that is something that the Secretary of State has announced that her office will be performing, just like we did in the primary election, to go through and ensure, once again, that our vote was fair, secure, and accurate. Now, on the challenging process, during counting, both parties, major parties here in Michigan, Democrats and Republicans, have an agreement that during the counting process, one Democratic challenger and one Republican challenger can observe each precinct being counted. If they see something that they want to challenge, they raise a flag. At that point, counting is stopped. An official comes over and reviews the challenge. Now, our state has made both state news and national news with claims that challengers were not allowed in to see what was happening at particular counting locations, and we fundamentally know that that was not true. It just was not. Particularly during a pandemic, there are capacity limits, but in TCF, in other counting locations, there was always a Republican and a Democratic challenger, at least one, observing the counting process. But what happened is many of the challengers were not raising challenges in the moment. Many were intimidating poll workers who were trying to count people's votes. Many were taking notes in notebooks and not raising a flag to challenge, instead keeping notes so that they could file affidavits for lawsuits later on. And to me, if you go into a situation knowing the rules, but choose not to follow them, that is blatantly disrespectful of every poll worker, every election official, everybody who works tirelessly to make sure these elections go through smoothly and securely, and does nothing but sow doubt in our election process. But to that end, lawsuits have been filed with claims of fraud and tampering with elections, and they have all been thrown out because there is no evidence to back up any widespread claims of voter fraud. Now, afterwards, there's the canvassing process. This is the process by which each county certifies their elections. And during that process, oftentimes in every single election, there are minor human errors and clerical errors that are found, where the numbers shift a little bit, but never enough to change the outcome of an election. And if it is that close, there are mechanisms in place to trigger a recount or an audit. But those methods are in place. So, yes, these are the steps that are in place, with many, many steps along the way for candidates or political parties to bring challenges forward if they have evidence of any wrongdoing or fraud, and that just simply has not happened here in Michigan. Michigan voters went to the polls in record numbers across the board, Democrat, Republican, Independent. We saw record turnout in the midst of a pandemic, and people voted. And I'll tell you, what we all share in Michigan is no matter what, you are probably disappointed in some part of this election. What happened here in Michigan is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won at the top of the ticket by 150,000 plus vote margin. But down ballot, Republicans kept control of the state house and many congressional districts. So I will tell you that there were people, really, really good, hardworking people who were running for state house seats that lost, that I supported. And that hurts sometimes, and it's disappointing, but it's what happens, and you have to respect the will of the voters and move forward. So that is what we need to move forward on. We have to accept the results of the election and come together, and it is time to move on. So we are facing a real crisis here at home. COVID-19 is raging out of control. And if you remember back to March and April, our healthcare workers were facing hell. It was like a war zone. They were hit with this virus that we didn't understand, that we didn't know how to treat, that was coming in record numbers and came out of nowhere. And there were people who could not get into the ICU. There were photos from hospitals in Detroit of body bags piling up in closets. And we had healthcare workers who were just throwing everything at the wall to save people's lives. And during that time, I remember walking around my neighborhood and seeing every single person in the neighborhood on their patios, walking around the streets, this sense of solidarity that we were all in this together, people writing signs in their windows and putting out signs thanking healthcare workers, chalk drawings on the sidewalk. There is this moment of solidarity that happens every time there's a crisis where we all come together. And I felt that in March and April and May in the beginning of this. But that has worn off. There are no longer people out every day when I'm out for a walk. There are no longer chalk drawings on the sidewalk. There are no longer signs in people's yards. But we are going through it again. And just as bad as we were in the beginning. Healthcare workers are exhausted. They are mentally exhausted. They are physically exhausted. Hospitals throughout our state are nearing capacity. And they're begging us to take this seriously. We are seeing these record numbers. And if you remember back in the spring, because Michigan was one of the first hotspots in the country, we had healthcare workers coming in from around the country, from other states to help us pick up this load. But right now, the entire country is a hotspot. So there are no extra people. There is nobody extra to come in and help us. There is nobody extra to come in and help pick up a shift for a nurse who is exhausted and is tired. There was a story that a friend of mine shared. She works as a contact tracer, and her husband is an ICU doctor. So they are hearing all the stories and seeing it firsthand. There was a woman who came into her husband's hospital really sick from COVID-19, and so sick that she was on a ventilator. And she's very, very lucky she got off of the ventilator, because many people who end up on a ventilator don't make it. So when she finally came off of the ventilator, the doctor asked her, Where do you think you got COVID? How do you think you contracted this virus? He wanted to understand how she got it and where it might be spreading to within her family, within her circle. And she said to him, I don't have COVID-19. It doesn't exist. It's a hoax. And she was convinced she had a heart condition. And that is what a lot of our healthcare workers are dealing with, trying to help people and save people's lives who, due to dangerous rhetoric that has come out, do not believe that this virus is real. And they're tired and they're exhausted. And I shared a video yesterday that just really struck home with me, which is that the reality is healthcare workers can quit. They might get to a point where it's too much. It's too much to take on. It's too emotionally draining. They just can't do it anymore. I know people working in healthcare who are suffering from PTSD, who had to take time off to be able to come back and save our lives. So I know we've heard from a lot of people who are supportive of the governor and the efforts to control the spread of this virus, and some who aren't, who say it's overreach. We don't need mandates. We don't need laws. And I'm just going to be upfront and honest with you right now. I am a lawmaker. It is my job to make laws. I wish we didn't have to. I wish we didn't have to. We shouldn't need laws or mandates to look out for each other and to look at this insidious virus as an attack against all of us, look it in the face and say, we are going to work together to get through this thing, because our healthcare workers and our medical experts are begging us to. I wish we did not need mandates or laws for everybody to wear a mask when you were around other people, for us to make sure we wash our hands frequently, for everybody to respect that this Thanksgiving is going to look a lot different. I am not having anybody over for Thanksgiving. We're going to do it over Zoom so that we can all get together next year and there's nobody missing. And it's going to be the same for Christmas, and it's going to be the same for my baby shower. And that sucks. It sucks. But it's the right thing to do, because the people on the front lines are telling us how bad it is and begging us to listen. I wish we could band together and face this head on. And the first thing we have to do is stop fanning the flames of this fake crisis that the President of the United States is fanning. It is embarrassing that members of the Michigan legislative delegation are ignoring a crisis at home when people are reaching out to our office for unemployment. They can't pay their bills. They are worried about the fact that unemployment runs out at the end of the year, or that they need their license renewed, and they want to do the right thing. People working in restaurants, people who own restaurants tell me, I want to do the right thing. I want to stay home because I know it's the right thing to do to get through this, but I have to be able to pay the bills. So my hope is that Mike Shirkey and Lee Chatfield, when they have time with the President of the United States, tell him with no reservations, Michigan voters decided, and it's time to move on. And we have to address this crisis that is plaguing not only Michigan, but the entire country. We desperately need additional relief to make sure everybody can pay their bills, to make sure our hospital systems are not overwhelmed, to make sure that our small businesses can survive and that our schools can stay safe. And yes, reopen. Everybody wants kids to be back in school, but we need the resources to be able to do that safely, to make sure teachers and administrators and staff can regularly get tested, to make sure we have proper ventilation and PPE and are able to put the right things in place to keep everything safe. That is what needs to happen in Washington, D.C. today. And for everybody who's reaching out asking, what can I do about this? Be a part of it. Let your voice be heard. I want to thank everybody who's called us, whether you agree with me or not. Thank you for calling us and being part of the solution. Keep calling and being a part of the solution. The State Board of Canvassers meeting is on Monday, and there is opportunity for public comment, particularly if you were a poll worker or a volunteer or an election official, somebody who can stand up and say confidently, I was in the room. I helped facilitate this election, and I can assure you it was run fairly, securely, and that throughout our process, any minor clerical errors were corrected and fixed, because that's how the process works. Please let your voice be heard so that we can move on, accept the results, and that's for all of us, because again, some people that I supported lost, some people that I supported won, and I'm sure you feel the same. And we have to come together and address the crisis that is facing us at home, because there are some promising vaccines on the way. They are coming. It's great news, but we have to get there first. And we can't do that unless we all come together and focus on solutions. Thank you.